Alright, so this is my first time really speaking in front of a crowd, so excuse any hiccups along the way. Video games, and it was a labor of love, and it still is, but it's really more about rebirth of the Renaissance man. With the advent of indie gaming, we're really looking at people who have to do everything. While I'm a big fan of focusing on a particular thing and within a larger company, on a smaller scale, you really have to be able to be the artist, the musician, the programmer, marketer, entrepreneur, and anything else involved with running a business. So this is going to, there's so much that goes into game development, this is going to touch on a little bit of everything. We are All Father Studios. I'm 51% of it. And actually my business partner in Santa Fe is listening in on Skype right now. He's muted so that his nieces don't interrupt us. All Father Studios, we just picked the name because it kind of sounded cool, so why not? Mike and I had met in college. We both have degrees in game design, and our entire college education was online. So for the last 4 years, I've never actually met this guy. So hopefully he's cool, right? Just to give you an idea of Mike, this awkward-looking gentleman is Mike.
Are you sure?
Yeah. It's a good question. He could have been catfishing me for the last 4 years, for all I know. Mike is, we're a two-man team. Like I said, we graduated together back in June. He was my class's salutatorian, so, I guess second place is the first place loser in some cases, but worked out for me. He is more technically oriented than I am when it comes to the programming and the level design, and he's actually a way better musician than I am. So while we have many of the same skills, we specialize in different skills. In almost every project we were in college, I was almost always the producer of our projects, or the man in charge, or the man responsible for kicking everyone else in the ass and making sure our projects were in time. So, that's Mike. Hi, Mike. I actually had a short trailer of our game, which, considering there's no intercom system or anything like that, might be kind of quiet. Oh, no, there we go. There's our short teaser trailer. The Decker Records is based off of classic Super Nintendo role-playing games, specifically Japanese role-playing games. They were very almost on-rails affairs, heavy, narrative-based, lots of menus, text, reading. It's not about running around and shooting your friend in the face like Call of Duty. This is more about adopting the role of a character and experiencing a story. We went with retro graphics, retro aesthetics, not only because it's popular right now, and Wired just had a really good article on the rebirth of the JRPG, but also because it was within our realm of possibilities. Mike and I were both trained on creating games in Unreal Development Kit, which is what the huge companies use to make their AAA games, like Borderlands and Call of Duty and stuff like that. We don't have the money to create or to have a 3D modeling program, which could cost around $1,300 just for one copy. We don't have the expertise with things like Maya and 3ds Max. So we decided to, A, make a game that was narrative-based because we both love JRPGs and we both loved like the hard-boiled Chandler noir 40s fiction, and also because we're both somewhat decent artists, and we could create, for instance, Decker here, which we drew her, you know. We created the story, we created all the assets, well, most of all the assets. The game did come with some pre-built assets. So to get a little more into the process, thankfully someone else covered telecommuting for me. This is fantastic. I didn't want to dwell on this too much, so this was great. Thanks for that. Obviously, Skype is huge for us. Mike is listening in on us right now. Google Drive we use for all of our documents, our statistics spreadsheets for experience distribution and level gaining. We almost rough draft the whole thing in spreadsheets on Drive to figure out experience curves, where the player is going to be, anything analytical. Our source control for our game is done through Perforce. I know some people use SVN or Tortoise SVN. We use Perforce. It's mainly what we were trained on in college. It's what we're familiar with. Perforce is fantastic. You know, you mess up something, you can always revert a single file. It's great every day. He's in Santa Fe. He's 2 hours behind me. So since we're in different time zones, it actually works out really well, because I can get my work done while he's still sleeping, and then I go to work actually work at the bread basket. I've made some of your sandwiches. And while I'm at work, he wakes up and gets a bunch of work done during the day. And then I get out of work at 3 or 4 o'clock. He takes a break. I go home and keep working off of the files he's done already. It's actually really handy having somebody on 2 separate time zones, because RPG Maker does not support layers like UDK does. We both can't be working on the same files at the same time. So in UDK you can create layers, you can both work on the same files. This you can't. So while one person's having downtime, the other person's having uptime. And even if we both have the same uptime, we can work on different projects. We are both, and I'd love to just consider myself a Renaissance man, but for instance, I did all of this artwork right here. This is a concept art for one of our characters called Herschel. And then Mike was doing the music over there in GarageBand. The music you heard for the trailer, I actually did through GarageBand. We split the music about 50-50. He creates most of his from scratch. I do most of mine from loops, because I'm not a musician. I'm a somewhat passable artist, but it's good enough for this genre. We capture the basis of the anime style, but we literally do everything. You know, art, music, code, design, level design, analytics, usability, testing, which we need to expand our testing pool significantly. But everything from the ground up. It's up to us. We were hoping to get our Kickstarter funded, which actually ends tonight, and it's probably going to fail, mainly so that we can outsource some of this work. We were hoping to maybe get some artists. We were hoping to get some musicians so that we can focus on the core game. It's looking like that might not happen, so we're just going to keep on trucking and doing everything ourselves, and the only thing that's really going to suffer is just going to push back our development time a little bit, and maybe our quality as far as the music's concerned. As far as making the game itself, we follow a pretty traditional development cycle. I know a lot of people do agile development. There's waterfall models. Because our game is not really an app, and it's not a casual game like, say, Candy Crush. It's not something your grandma's playing while in line at the grocery store. We have to follow a more traditional development cycle. Before we started building anything, we had pre-production. We had to write the script. We wrote the entire script. We had to come up with the characters, the game ideas. There's what's called a game design document, which covers all of your core game mechanics and concepts and everything. There's a narrative design document that talks about all the backstory that most players really aren't even going to figure out, because you have to create a realistic world before you even show any of it to anyone. Then we had to design our core mechanics. Our mechanics, in this case, are really what makes your game your game. combat, running, moving, walking, jumping, whatever. Then we got into our implementation. Once again, it's all us. Everything's all us. Implementation, testing, deployment. We are every stage of this. Within each stage, the biggest thing that we do is our rapid prototyping. Now, when you're coming up with your game idea, you need to figure out your core mechanics. Now, everyday mechanics of a game, running, jumping, shooting, almost every game has this. Our game has combat. Almost every genre of game has combat. While you're not running around and jumping, they're still fighting in our game. While that's a mechanic, and it's a very important mechanic, it's not our core mechanic. Core mechanics are what makes your game yours. If you take away your core mechanic, your game's just going to be like all the other games. In our case, our core mechanics, we have 3 primary core mechanics. Our go-it-alone system, where sometimes people want to make the game harder for themselves on purpose. It's fun. The extra challenge is good. So we want to reward those kinds of players. Some people don't want to play with 4 people in a party. They want to play with 1. So we have an option. Every time you go into a dungeon, you can go it alone. You get extra money, extra rewards, and so that your other characters don't miss out on it, when they're reintroduced back into the party, their experience gets brought up to the same as the main character. We have our satisfaction system. Performing attacks in combat will generate investigation points. We have kind of, if any of you are familiar with Final Fantasy and their limit break system, it's kind of the same thing. You take damage and you generate a bar. And when the bar gets full, you can pull off a super attack. Our super attacks generate special points, investigation points. And the other interesting thing about our satisfaction system is we kind of based it off of noir fiction. You know, the hero, he gets captured, he gets beat up a little bit in the face, in the facial area, and then, he gets all the information out of the enemies while they're beating the crap out of him. He loosens the ropes and then pummels them to death. So it's kind of the same thing. As your bar fills up, you will eventually do more damage. And as your bar fills up and you perform your special attacks, you get these points that'll help you figure out the story. And these points are used with our investigation system. So when you go into certain areas, you'll be prompted, how many points do you want to use to investigate this crime scene? And depending on the number of points you use, you will find clues. And these clues, now this is where our game will differ greatly from JRPGs. JRPGs are an on-rails story. It's like you get to play the main character of a book. Our game has branching dialogue, branching storyline, areas you might never find unless you find the clue, which conceptually is an awesome idea. Practically is a pain in the balls. Or the ovaries, whatever. Because we take our time to create all of these areas that players may find, possibly, if they feel like it. If they have the time to explore, if they're the player that grinds and kills every single enemy and farms them for as many points as possible, they'll find every little nook and cranny of the game. There's the speed players who go through and try to do everything as fast as possible, and they're going to miss out on 40% of the game. We have to create a game that appeals. It can't appeal to everyone, but it has to appeal to different kinds of players within that group. We have to make a game that's interesting for the hardcore players, but not so hard that it gets the casual players to run away. We need to create all these things that make the hardcore player want to investigate everything. So it's a lot of work. And the big thing about this is our rapid prototyping. We are constantly reiterating a mechanic over and over and over again. We spend about an hour. If we have a game idea, we'll spend an hour trying to get it work. And if it doesn't work after an hour, we don't necessarily get rid of it. We shelf it. We go back to the main game. And if we have time for side projects, tying it all in, we'll go back to this idea, give it another hour, cycle through it, then go back to the main game. And then if we get our mechanic working, we'll integrate it into the game. There are a lot of ideas that didn't make it. A lot of ideas that either they made it through the prototyping cycle, but they didn't make it through the playtesting cycle, where the idea just wasn't fun. And ultimately, you can't shoehorn an idea into being fun. You know, we'll play it. It was okay. We'll have other people play it. We'll have some tissue testers play it. Some hardcore gamers play it. Every kind of tester. And ultimately, the consensus for some of our ideas were they were just crap. So we cut them. Our engine is it's built for 2D games like this. It's called, in the proud tradition of the Japanese just tacking on suffixes to everything, RPG Maker VX Ace. Not to be confused with all of the other iterations of RPG Maker, which have fewer suffixes. It's based off a Ruby script, a special kind of Ruby script called RGSS, the Ruby Game System script. And our game uses two primary ways of building. We have the global, the Ruby script itself is used to globally control the game. You have a combat system, you want that system to be the same in combat every time you get into combat. That's where the Ruby script comes in. We can make changes to that combat system and it's going to affect combat across the entire game. But our game is created as a series of set pieces. You go from scene to scene, and global scripting isn't great for that. You would have to put in so many variables and switches and triggers and everything within the script to say, just when you're here, just do this. It doesn't work so well, which is where we have our in-game editor right over there. That's where our database is. That's our database. That's our level builder. That's our graphics. That's our experience curves, our every item, every piece of armor. And when you think about a game that has 300 pieces of armor, 200 weapons, we made all 200. We made all 300. We made everything by hand. And not only do you have to do all of that by hand, you have to take into consideration how that affects the game. You can't just up the attack value of a sword, for instance, without it affecting how powerful the character is. And if they're more powerful, they're burning through a dungeon faster, which means they level faster, which means you have to make all the other creatures after that point harder. So at this point, this is going to be enough of the static slides because, frankly, it's boring. I'll get there we go. So I was actually considering here doing more of a live demo. Miss Selena Kyle, everybody. Let me go back into our here. All right, here we go. So here we have our perforce. Just make sure that Mike hasn't submitted anything real quick today. He has. I'm working off a local copy of the game, but as you can see here through our perforce, everything with a yellow symbol means it's a file that I need to get a new revision for. So before, if I were working on our real copy, I would have to update all of this. Doesn't take long, 30 seconds, before I do anything. Because if I work on something and without updating, there's going to be a conflict, and we have to resolve the conflict, and usually that means one of us has just wasted about 3 hours of work. Here we have the editor itself. This is our newest dungeon. We just added this to the game not too long ago. It's a completely optional dungeon. The player can skip it. They cannot skip it. If they do skip it, it's not going to affect the game really. There's no key pivotal moments in this scene. It's just something fun. If they find it, cool. If they don't, no big deal. And that's really big in video games. It doesn't sound it, but it's huge. Optional content is massive, especially American players. Even though they're playing a Japanese game, the Japanese prefer their games way more on rails, way more narrative, way more just linear. Where the American games, especially games like, for instance, Skyrim, or what's known as a Western RPG, they're all about carving out your piece of the world, creating a name for yourself. Where the Japanese games are more about, you're this person. You're going to go do this thing. That's pretty much it. Which is fun in and of itself. It's fantastic if you've got a really interesting story to tell. But the American games, it's more about creating your own story. So here we have our editor. These are our tiles. Every single one of these tiles we just basically use to paint a scene. So for instance, if I wanted to change something down here, let's say I don't like that particular kind of brick. We go here and we pretty much just change it. I can create the roof. It's pretty standard, you know. There's really nothing spectacular about it. If you want to create new assets, we go into GIMP and we'll create new assets. Here I was working on the concept art for Herschel, where we can literally go into GIMP, open up the tiles, and switch what all the tiles look like. Now, as far as controlling the game, all of these little squares you see around here, these are all called events. This is what I was talking about. These are the things that control your game on a local level. For instance, we have a water elemental. We have a variable event here. This is pretty much as your if statement in programming. If you are alone, do this attack. If you're not alone, do that. On a more complicated scale, we have up here the boss event for this scene. All of this here. All of this is logic, not only based off of if you're alone or not, but scattered around the scene, there are dead bodies, as you can quite graphically see. If you decide to spend the points, or if you have the points to spend on these bodies, your character in the game starts to get a clue that maybe there's something else going on here, especially since all the bodies have these holes around them. You got all these dead goblins, and while you're going to go through and create a lot more dead goblins on your way through the dungeon, these are special dead goblins. And if you investigate all the bodies, that boss is different based on the number of bodies you investigate. You go through, if you find no bodies, you go into the boss encounter, and you're going to be the character is going to be completely surprised. The fight's going to be harder. And not only just, so all of this here controls if you found no bodies. And then inside of that, if you were alone when you fight the boss. Here, you have 1 to 4 bodies. It's just a normal fight. You kind of knew something was coming. And then if you spend the time to investigate every single body, you get the jump on the enemy, and you get a couple rounds, you get an attack bonus, a couple rounds of free attack, stuff like that. The bodies play a much bigger role than just being an interesting mechanic or being just something you do in the game. They are what's called a sink. In the game, you have to manage the economy of the game, and not just the money, but the investigation points or the economy of the game. You don't want the player to have 80 investigation points, because then they're going to find everything everywhere. And you kind of have to protect the player against themselves. They'll create a game that's not fun for themselves and then blame you for it. So this is a way for us to get the player to use investigation points to sink it into the game. We realized at one point the player was going to have too many investigation points, so in a different scene over here, in our black market, in a less obvious way, we have a woman where you can turn your investigation points into money. So the player can manage their own economy in the game. How many investigation points do they want? Would they rather trade them for money to get better gear so they can go out and get more investigation points? Once again, like I said at the beginning, there's so much that I could cover in this about the game itself. I just want to give a really quick demo after I do this in full screen. Like I said, keep in mind the music, art, programming, everything done by us, 2 guys. Once we get classic JRPG feel, blue menus, white borders. If any of you played Final Fantasy back in the day, you know what I'm talking about. So you have to guide the player without having a screen that says, go over here, which is way too common in a lot of games. So we created this dangling rope. It wasn't in the game, we created it. If the player sees it, they can go in if they want. The next scene's not going to have any music, so any of you enjoying the music are shit out of luck on that one. Actually, never mind, it's carrying over. Do you want to go it alone? No thanks. We can go back up if we want. We don't have to. No. We got our enemies here. Typically these games have a, you don't know where the enemies are, you just walk around and you get attacked by one. We opted for a more, here are the enemies. You can fight them if you want to. So here we have our water elementals. This was custom art once again. Our combat, you got our characters. Decker's our main character, she's our investigator. Nigel's our healer. Herschel is our, what would be called the tank, if any of you play World of Warcraft. Shade is our thief. Combat's first-person perspective. This is really classic gameplay from back in the day. You go through, you assign your commands, who you want to attack. We got some magic here, we got some support. SP is our satisfaction points. When that's full, you got to perform your special attack. We got our regular special attacks. Heavy-handed, got your back. Why not? We'll just go for that. And then you can vanish. So that, here's a good... What this just told me is I need to make these guys way fucking weaker. Considerably weaker. Because this is a standard level for the characters in the game right here. But here we have our satisfaction now. You got hundreds. Perform your satisfaction attacks. We got revenge. And cap them in the knee if we like. We'll just go for revenge right now. We know we took a lot of damage. We can have Herschel heal us up. This game also supports 360 controller support, by the way. So for those of you not keyboard oriented, we got controller support in here. Satisfaction. See, Herschel is Decker's former partner on the guard force. So here we've got move it along and come quietly, because he's a bit of a cop. And then Shade, since we vanished the first turn, we have a mechanic with Shade where you can vanish, you can hide from the enemies, it lowers your chance of getting hit. And while you're vanished, you can backstab for extra damage, which we stole that one straight from Dungeons and Dragons. So they killed Decker before she could perform her attack. Nigel died. Herschel died. Shade died. So what this told me is I need to go in and I need to remove the attack that kills everyone. Here's the big thing that makes our game personally better, in my opinion, and different than many of the games you see on the market today. Game over. It's done. You lost. There's no continue. There's a save system. You can save the game whenever you want, wherever you want. That's up to you. If you didn't save the game for 2 hours and you die, you just lost 2 hours of gameplay. That's it. I mean, now if I go back, I got to continue from a previous save file. So, like I said, there's so much more that can go into this, but that's pretty much the gist of it. We're looking at our Kickstarter ends tonight. We're going to keep going anyway, even if it fails. We might launch an Indiegogo campaign, because they let you keep the money you raise partway through. Kickstarter doesn't. And we have a website up. You go to allfatherstudios.com. You can actually download the demo of the game. PC only. Sorry for Mac people. Unless you're like me on a Mac running Windows. You can go, you can get our demo. The demo is the first act of the game. It's not everything in the first act of the game. It's enough to give you a taste and make you want to come back. We're looking at launch in June. We're going to release the game in 2 separate ways. We're looking at full Steam integration if you're on Steam, which will, help with patching. We're not going to do microtransactions because that's fucking lame. And we're also going to release a DRM-free version of the game to kind of create groundswell for Act 2. So you can go on Steam in hopefully June or July and download our game. You can get the demo now from our website, which is DRM free. So once you download the demo, you can share it to all your friends. And that way when we show up on Steam Greenlight, give us lots of votes. And then through the DRM free, even if we release Act 1 DRM free, while we may not be getting as much money out of it, hopefully we get enough notoriety and, like I said, groundswell out of it. So that's video games for now, unless I come back later and talk about specifically more one kind of video game. Thank you.
Anyone have a few questions? 1 or 2 questions we got time for? Yes.
Oh, is it possible to do like an effective playthrough where if you take advantage of type advantages and other mechanics within the game, you don't have to do lots of grinding?
You mean like if you're, like what do you mean for instance?
Like for example, in Mother 3, they had like the whole battle system was set up to where like if you understood rhythm, you could just keep attacking over and over up to like 16 times per one attack. So that led to throughout the game, so you didn't have to spend as much time grinding. You could just defeat the enemies more effectively. Or just, like,
right. So instead of while JRPGs, grinding is a big part of them. Back in the day, if you wanted to walk around in circles and get to level 100 before you even advance the story, that's cool. You can do that. While we are trying to protect the player from getting too far ahead in the game, we also want to give them the ability to grind. So since we have more control because we removed random battles. You don't just walk around and get jumped out of nowhere anymore. You see the enemies, you clear all the enemies in a dungeon, you have to move on. So we put in enough enemies for the grind. If you don't want to grind, you can skip the enemies by walking around them. In some areas, we do have random battles. They're explained, creatures underwater, you can't see them, they jump you randomly. We also have, which I didn't show, and these aren't in the demo, class crystals. So while your character is a thief type, you give him a class crystal that turns him more into an assassin. He does more damage. He's less about stealing, more about attacking. You give him a class crystal that turns him more into a thief. He does less damage, but he steals more things from other characters. Decker, if you're into playing the game by yourself, you give him a class crystal and she can heal better, but she does less damage if you're in a party all the time. We give a large amount of customization. For anybody who played Grandia, it's kind of like the egg system in Grandia.
Do the dungeons repop, or is it?
Yep, the dungeons repopulate, because what we have for event control is there's 2 ways to make an event stop doing things. Events can trigger either as a parallel process, so they trigger while you're running the game, or events can trigger because you touch them or because you activated the action button. Here we have our magic vendor in the black market, which you can interrogate her for an investigation point. And then after you're done talking to her, there's a thing here called a self switch. Self switch will switch over to a new tab that has activate this tab if self switch A is on. Every time you come back to this dungeon, this is how the character is going to be on tab 2. Whereas in our dungeons, we have erase event. Erase event will erase the event this one time. You kill the enemy, he disappears. If you leave the map and come back, the enemy's coming back as well. Right now we don't have scaling in the game, so if you come back as level 100 to the first dungeon, the enemies aren't harder. You're just going to be able to plow through them. Any other questions?
I'm just wondering, so you said you were hoping to launch in June. How long have you been working on it?
We graduated actually June last year. We took a month off because we were kind of sick of seeing each other after 2.5 years of college. We got it was a 4-year degree, but it was through Full Sail Online. So that was the 2.5 years to get a 4-year degree. Took a month off, so we've been working on it for almost a year now. Pretty much in all telecommuting. Like I said, I've never met this guy in person. He could be a 300-pound woman by the time I see him. I'm using a voice modulator. Hopefully, Mike, you are not a 300-pound woman. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you very much.